But first tonight, Peter Dutton has announced his shadow ministry, matching Labor with 24 members and 10 women. Angus Taylor, is the shadow treasurer. Andrew Hastie enters the front bench as shadow defence minister. Simon Birmingham in foreign affairs. And Julian Leeser, a new front bench entry as well. He becomes shadow attorney general. Karen Andrews will stay in Home Affairs. Dan Tehan is in Immigration and Citizenship. And Anne Ruston is the shadow Health Minister. Marise Payne, who had indicated she was going to quit Cabinet, will stay in Cabinet as Cabinet Secretary. But what's interesting is that Scott Morrison's most prominent supporters have been punished. Alex Hawke, a very divisive figure in the party, has been dropped altogether, while Stuart Robert, who had hoped to hold the Treasury portfolio, is in the outer ministry as Assistant Treasurer. Scott Morrison himself will sit on the backbench while he remains in Parliament. Dutton has kept Alan Tudge, a controversial figure, in the shadow ministry. He'll stay in the education portfolio. The Nats will have 6 shadow cabinet positions, but David Littleproud still doesn't have their best performer, Matt Canavan, on the team, and Barnaby Choice will be in the relatively junior Veterans Affairs portfolio. Overall, there are some talented appointments, of course, Andrew Hastie, James Paterson and Anne Ruston, but apart from some of the talented incomers, it's a hodgepodge and an unimpressive shadow ministry. It's very underwhelming. Many of the appointments will be unable to take the fight to the Labor government in key portfolios. And we're going to discuss this more later on in the show. And I've got the new Shadow Minister for Cybersecurity and Countering Foreign Interference, James Paterson, live shortly. But this shadow ministry comes after Anthony Albanese announced his own cabinet this week. Apart from the well-canvassed problem with handing the women's portfolio to one of the so-called mean girls in Katie Gallagher, apart from that, the biggest problem with Albanese's cabinet is the breakup of Home Affairs. This powerful super ministry has been working very well for 5 years. But Labor, in one of its first acts in government, was to tear it up. It has been gutted, with AFP, AUSTRAC and Criminal Intelligence Commission moving out of Home Affairs and into the Attorney General's Department. Home Affairs now essentially consists of immigration and ASIO. Now, there was no warning that Labor was going to dismantle Home Affairs. This was a secret plan that voters were not told about during the election campaign. And it does matter because ultimately there's the risk that dismantling it could weaken our national security. And it's a point Opposition Leader Peter Dutton made this week.
Now there are attempts to tear apart the Home Affairs Department, so we're really concerned about that. But I just worry that by going back into this siloed arrangement, that Anthony Albanese might be making Mark Dreyfus happy, but it's going to make us less safe as a country.
Less safe as a country, he ended there. Having these intelligence and national security agencies in the same department reporting to the same minister meant that they could work together seamlessly, whether it was on terrorism, foreign interference, espionage or crime. And that's why Home Affairs was set up in the first place. Oversight of these agencies was separate, and that was under the Attorney General's purview. So you had a situation where the Home Affairs Minister, and mostly it was Peter Dutton in the last government, would push for tougher laws to tackle crime, terrorism and foreign influence. And you then had the more cautious Attorney General providing advice about whether or not this was within the law and even in the Constitution. And you'll remember Dutton faced pushback when he wanted to strip ISIS terrorists of their Australian citizenship to stop them from coming home. He also had to fight for agencies to have high-end powers to intercept the private communications of some of criminals, but some of them were Australians, on the dark web. And this happened in the case of Ironside, which, as you know, was a global success. Under Labor's model, Mark Dreyfus, who's the Attorney General, will be in charge of both the operations and the oversight functions, which is hardly an ideal model. Dutton was very aggressive when he was the minister in pushing the boundaries in order to protect our national security. Dreyfus, as a trained lawyer, might have a more cautious view. He might be more focused on compliance with the law and the Constitution rather than finding ways around them or even changing them in order to fight criminals and take down cartels. Dreyfus is very strong-willed, and you can imagine the dynamics in cabinet when arguments will inevitably unfold when he comes up against the new Home Affairs Minister in Clare O'Neil. And we know she wouldn't have been in that job if Kristina Keneally hadn't lost her seat in Fowler. You can only question whether this move would have happened had Kristina Keneally still had Home Affairs. Would she have allowed her own super ministry to be gutted? But what's quite worrying about all of this is that Albanese and Mark Dreyfus haven't explained their rationale for this change. Other than talking about the AFP, they haven't explained their rationale. And it does tend to imply that it comes down to a grab for more power from Mark Dreyfus, who had been pushing for some changes to Home Affairs. And as I mentioned, he'd been pushing for AFP to come out of the portfolio. Now, if you look back at how successful this department's been, the last serious attack, terror attack, that came close to unfolding in Australia was the Etihad bombing of July 2017. Had this succeeded, hundreds of people would have lost their lives on a flight leaving Sydney. The terror attack was stopped at the 11th hour because of Israeli intelligence, which intercepted encrypted messages. Now, this was just before Home Affairs was created, and since then, the department has managed to thwart potential attacks at much earlier stages. Many of them haven't ever come to be known in the public. They've been kept secret. The agencies all work together under one roof, reporting to the one minister, sharing information. But if you break up the agencies under different ministers, as is now happening under Labor, this creates gaps that a terror attack can prosper through. The more gaps, the more blind spots in information flows that terrorists could exploit.